The sound of heels echoes through the marble lobby, sharp and lonely. Cameras flash as two officers grip Camilla's arms, their badges catching the sterile light. Her blouse is wrinkled, her wrists bound in metal, her breath shallow with disbelief. Around her, co-workers whisper, their faces blending into a blur of shock and betrayal. And just a few feet away, Richard Hale watches, unmoved, his reflection cold in the glass wall beside him. She looks up at him, eyes wide, silently begging for one word, one truth that could save her. But none comes. Richard's jaw tightens, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond her humiliation. For a moment, she almost laughs. A broken sound swallowed by the hum of the building's air conditioning. The billionaire she once admired now watches her fall as if she were a stranger. "Camilla Torres," the officer announces, "you're under arrest for corporate fraud and embezzlement." The words hang heavy, sinking into the polished floor like spilled ink. She stumbles, her knees weak, as a wave of murmurs ripples through the office. Somewhere, a phone records everything, her disgrace going viral before she's even left the building. If you were standing there, watching this woman dragged away for a crime she swears she didn't commit, what would you believe? The headlines or her eyes? Before we judge, take a second, subscribe, like, and stay until the end. Because what happens next will turn everything upside down. Now let's go back. Before the handcuffs, before the cameras, before the betrayal. Back to the quiet mornings when Camilla believed loyalty could protect her. When she still thought honesty mattered more than power. When she thought working hard was enough. Her life was ordinary. Coffee stains on reports, polite smiles in glass elevators, late nights spent balancing numbers and hope. She was the kind of employee who held a company together without anyone noticing. Richard used to say she was the spine of this place. She believed him, every word. But the first sign came quietly. A missing invoice, a number that didn't fit. She fixed it, of course, thinking it was her own mistake. Then another, and another. Each correction felt like a pebble tossed into a still lake, ripples spreading farther than she could see. Something deep inside her whispered, "This isn't an accident." At night, she'd sit by the window of her small apartment, diary open, pen trembling. She wrote about the numbers that haunted her, the fear she couldn't explain, the sense that she was cleaning up after someone powerful. The city lights outside looked like bars, bright, distant, unreachable. Then came the night Richard asked her to stay late. He smiled the way powerful men do when they already know your answer. "Camilla, you're the only one I can trust," he said, sliding a folder toward her. Inside, the pages glimmered with figures she didn't understand, and signatures she didn't remember writing. The air that night felt different, heavy, electric, laced with danger she couldn't name. She left the building long after midnight, her reflection fractured in every glass panel she passed. In her heart, a seed of dread began to take root. That was the night everything started to unravel. Morning sunlight spilled through the office windows, painting gold across the polished desks. Camilla arrived before everyone else, the faint smell of coffee following her like a quiet halo. Her movements were precise, booting up the computer, stacking files, adjusting her blazer. She loved the calm before the phones rang, the illusion of control. To her, this place wasn't just work, it was stability, dignity, survival. Richard Hale walked in at exactly 8:30, crisp suit, perfect tie, the kind of presence that made rooms hold their breath. "Morning, Camilla," he said, not looking up from his phone. She smiled anyway, the reflex of someone who'd long learned that approval was currency. He was the face of success, the man she'd trusted to lead with integrity. To be near him meant safety, or so she thought. Her colleagues admired her, the widow who never complained, the secretary who never made mistakes. They joked that she could run the company better than Richard himself. But behind her tidy desk lay a pile of overdue bills, reminders of a life she was barely holding together. Every paycheck was a lifeline. Every extra hour worked was one step closer to keeping her son in school. The days blurred together. The hum of printers, the rhythm of heels on marble, the soft click of her keyboard composing another report. She handled the billionaire's schedule, his meetings, his secrets. There was a strange comfort in her invisibility, in being the silent engine behind someone else's empire. But even the most silent gears grind when pressure builds. One Friday evening, Richard appeared at her desk holding a glass of scotch. "You know, Camilla, I couldn't do any of this without you," he said, his tone warm, but-rehearsed. She blushed, grateful for the praise, unaware of the trap hidden in his words. He handed her a folder. "Could you review this before Monday? It's sensitive." She nodded, as she always did. Trust was her default language. That night, she stayed long after the lights went out, reviewing the numbers inside that folder. They didn't make sense. Transfers between offshore accounts, approval signatures in her name. Her first instinct was that it must be a glitch. Her second was denial. She closed the folder and locked it away, whispering to herself, "It's just a mistake, but mistakes don't come with initials forged in blue ink." The more she tried to ignore it, the louder her conscience screamed. She began checking older files, tracing numbers, connecting dots that shouldn't have connected. Her stomach turned cold. For the first time, she felt the weight of something far bigger than her desk, something rotten under all that glass and polish. Still, she told no one. How could she? The company was her second home, and Richard, despite his flaws, had given her a chance when she needed it most. Besides, she had no proof, only unease, growing like a shadow at her back. So she smiled through meetings, sent polite emails, and pretended not to see the cracks forming. One evening, while leaving the building, she caught her reflection in the lobby mirror, the same mirror that would later watch her being arrested. For a moment, she didn't recognize herself. Her eyes looked tired, her smile hollow. She whispered under her breath, "You're fine, Camilla. You're fine." But the tremor in her voice told another story. That night in her diary, she wrote a single line that would later haunt her. "I think I'm fixing things I shouldn't be fixing." Richard Hale was the kind of man people admired before they even knew why. His name glowed on charity boards and magazine covers, the symbol of modern success. Cameras loved him, the sharp jawline, the easy confidence, the practiced humility. To the world, he was a visionary, a man who built empires and gave back. But the higher the pedestal, the darker the shadow beneath it. Camilla saw only the surface, the expensive suits, the handshakes with politicians, the way he spoke about legacy. She organized his calendar around luncheons and galas where he smiled for photos under golden lights. The Richard she worked for was untouchable, his confidence intoxicating. Sometimes she caught herself wishing her late husband had shared that kind of certainty. It made her feel safe. It made her blind. Behind closed doors, though, Richard was a storm barely contained. His smile could freeze in a heartbeat, his charm replaced by a cutting tone that left silence trembling. "You don't understand pressure, Camilla," he once snapped, eyes cold. "One mistake, and everything collapses." She'd apologized, even though she'd done nothing wrong. That was how power worked. Invisible chains made of fear. He hid his panic behind work. Late-night calls filled his office with the hum of deceit, hushed voices, coded phrases, laughter that never reached his eyes. Camilla, staying late one evening, overheard a conversation that sent chills down her spine. "If the numbers don't balance, make them disappear," Richard said quietly. The man she thought she knew vanished in that single sentence. She froze by the copy machine, heart hammering, pretending she hadn't heard. Her instincts screamed to leave, but her loyalty chained her to that floor. When he emerged moments later, his face was calm again, his charm restored. "You're still here, Camilla?" he asked with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. She nodded. "Just finishing up, sir." Her voice shook despite her best effort. That night, she couldn't sleep. The city outside her window pulsed with life, but her world had gone still. She thought about quitting, packing her desk, walking away before it was too late. But then she remembered her son, his tuition, the fragile safety net she'd built. Fear disguised itself as responsibility, and she chose silence. Silence, she would learn, is complicity. Over the next weeks, Richard's mask began to crack. He was short-tempered in meetings, barking orders, losing his calm with executives who questioned him. Yet in public, his charisma shone brighter than ever. Interviews painted him as a self-made genius. Employees whispered about his generosity. Camilla began to see the performance for what it was, not confidence but desperation. Once, while organizing old contracts, she found a document signed with Richard's name and another signature, hers, forged in identical ink. Her pulse spiked. She ran her finger over the signature, numb with disbelief. Someone had copied her identity, weaponized her trust. When she looked up, Richard stood in the doorway watching. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. She forced a smile. "Yes. Everything's fine." Lowering his voice. "Good, because I need people I can rely on, Camilla, especially now." His tone carried the weight of warning disguised as praise. When he left, she sat frozen, staring at the door long after it closed. The realization hit her like cold rain. She wasn't protecting him anymore. She was protecting herself from him. In her diary that night, her handwriting trembled across the page. "The man I work for smiles in public and lies in private. I just don't know which version of him will destroy me first." Sleep became a stranger to Camilla. Each night the numbers danced behind her eyelids, endless columns of transactions, whispers of deceit hidden in spreadsheets. She started keeping coffee in a thermos instead of a cup, too afraid to close her eyes for more than a minute. The office lights flickered over her hunched figure like interrogation lamps. Her silence became her shield and her prison. She told herself she was protecting the company, protecting everyone. If she could just fix the errors, maybe no one would get hurt. But the truth was simpler, crueler. She was protecting the man who had already chosen her as the scapegoat. The thought made her chest tighten. Every correction she made, every late-night signature she reviewed, tied the noose tighter around her own name. Her diary filled with confessions she couldn't say aloud. She wrote about her late husband, how he used to call her the strongest woman he'd ever met. She wrote about her son, about wanting him to be proud. Then she wrote about the fear, the one that sat in her throat like glass, sharp and constant. The pages smelled of ink and sweat and desperation. Richard's behavior shifted. He grew colder, detached, his eyes darting during meetings like a man cornered by his own lies. He stopped thanking her, stopped smiling altogether. The only time he looked at her was when something went wrong, as if daring her to notice the pattern. She did notice, but she said nothing. Words, she realized, could be used against her too. Sometimes in the quiet of the empty office, she would stare at his reflection in the glass walls, two figures in a cage of wealth and deceit. He was still charming in public, still revered by investors. Yet up close, Camilla saw the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was watching. He was afraid, but not of guilt. He was afraid of losing. One evening she found a printed memo on her desk. Account discrepancies under investigation. Finance division. Her pulse spiked. The email header was traced to Richard's private assistant, but the attachments were all documents she'd handled. It wasn't an accident. It was groundwork, the slow construction of a narrative that would soon erase her. That night, she called her friend Julia, the only person she trusted, but hung up. Before saying a word, what could she even explain? That she'd been rewriting the truth for a man who never intended to protect her, that she'd buried her morals beneath his approval. The silence on the other end of the line was safer than confession. Her body began to show the strain. Trembling hands, sleepless eyes, headaches that blurred her vision. Co-workers started whispering that she was burning out. Richard, ever the actor, asked in meetings if she was doing okay, feigning concern. Each time she smiled. Each time she died a little more inside. The breaking point came when she found her own name at the bottom of an internal audit report, listed as the sole authorizing party. Her heart went cold. She checked the file history, the signatures, the timestamps. Everything had been altered, carefully, perfectly. The trap was almost complete. That night, her diary ended with a single, trembling line. "I am holding up a lie so heavy it might crush me before anyone sees the truth." The storm arrived on a Monday morning, disguised as routine. Men in tailored suits walked through the glass doors carrying folders and cold authority. Their badges glimmered under the fluorescent lights. External financial audit. The air shifted, heavy and electric, as if the building itself knew something terrible was about to surface. Camilla's stomach dropped when she saw the company's CFO whispering urgently into Richard's ear. For years, Camilla had been the quiet ghost behind the numbers. Now those numbers had come back to haunt her. "We'll need every document tied to executive accounts," one of the auditors said. She nodded, her hands cold, her smile professional. But inside, panic rippled like a heartbeat. Every file she touched was another thread in a web she hadn't spun. Richard appeared calm, too calm. He guided the auditors through the office like a gracious host, his tone smooth, his eyes sharp. "You'll find our records impeccable," he said, glancing at Camilla just long enough to make her skin crawl. That look told her everything. He had already rehearsed this moment. He had already decided who would burn. By noon, her desk was surrounded by files and questions she couldn't answer. The auditors asked about approvals, about irregular transfers, about her digital signature. Each time she opened her mouth, Richard interrupted, polite, precise, in control. "I'm sure Ms. Torres meant well," he'd say with an icy smile. "She manages an enormous workload." The room heard compassion. Camilla heard accusation. She worked through lunch, desperate to find something that could clear her name. But the deeper she dug, the clearer it became. The files had been altered. Names changed, timestamps manipulated, audit trails deleted. It was too clean to be an accident. It was art, forged by someone who knew how to make guilt look like loyalty. That evening, Richard called her into his office. The blinds were drawn, the city's glow painting thin gold lines across the floor. He didn't offer her a seat. "You'll take care of this," he said quietly, his voice low and final. "We both know what happens if this goes public." Camilla froze. "Sir, I didn't—" He cut her off. "Don't!" His tone wasn't angry. It was lethal in its calm. She left his office numb, the echo of his words replaying like a curse. Outside, rain began to fall against the glass, streaking the city's skyline into a blur. For the first time, she felt the walls closing in. Not metaphorically, but physically, the air too thick to breathe. Somewhere inside her, the last piece of trust finally snapped. At home, she spread the audit reports across her kitchen table. Highlighter marks, sticky notes, and coffee stains covered her last attempt at control. Her son peeked from his bedroom door. "Mom, are you okay?" She smiled weakly. "Just tired, baby. Go to sleep." When the door closed, she whispered, "I'm sorry," to no one but herself. Before dawn, she began copying everything onto a flash drive. Emails, ledgers, signatures. If Richard was building a case against her, she would build one of her own. Her fingers trembled as she labeled the folder, "For truth. If I disappear." The act felt both brave and hopeless, like writing a message in a bottle before a shipwreck. That night, her diary entry ended with trembling ink. "He said we'd both go down, but only one of us will." The office felt different that morning. Quieter, colder, like the calm before something breaks. Camilla arrived early, as always, but her access card blinked red at the security gate. She tried again. Denied. The guard looked away, avoiding her eyes. "There must be a mistake," she said, forcing a smile that felt foreign on her lips. But deep down, she already knew. The mistake had been trusting him. When she reached her desk, her computer screen demanded a new password she didn't have. Her drawers were empty, her photo frame gone. Richard's assistant appeared, avoiding her gaze. "Mr. Hale asked that you wait in the conference room," she murmured before walking away. The hallway stretched endlessly, every step echoing like a countdown. Inside the glass room, Richard stood with 2 HR representatives and a man she didn't recognize, corporate security. "Camilla," Richard began, voice measured, almost regretful. "We've discovered severe irregularities tied to your accounts. Until we clarify things, your employment is suspended." Her throat closed. "You know that's not true," she whispered. His gaze didn't flicker. "I trusted you," he said softly, like a man rehearsing heartbreak for the cameras. Security escorted her co-workers pretended to be busy, eyes glued to screens. No one spoke. Her heels clicked across the marble one last time, each sound a heartbeat in slow motion. Outside, the sun felt cruelly bright, the city indifferent. Her phone buzzed. A message from the bank, account frozen due to investigation. Her entire life collapsed in a single vibration. She spent hours sitting in her car, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel. Everything she'd built, her job, her reputation, her safety, had evaporated in one morning. She wanted to scream, to run back inside and tear the truth out of him. Instead, she drove home in silence, numb and small against the vast city that had never noticed her. That night, she reread her diary, her fingers tracing the ink-stained pages. Every warning, every instinct she'd ignored, stared back at her in cruel clarity. She thought about burning it, destroying the evidence of her fear. But something inside her refused. "If they take everything," she whispered, "they won't take my truth." She hid the diary under the floorboard, unaware of how much it would one day save her. The knock came the next morning. Loud, official, final. 2 police officers stood at her door. "Camilla Torres." She nodded, heart pounding. "You're under arrest for financial fraud and embezzlement." Her son appeared behind her, confusion and fear mixing in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. She wanted to comfort him, but her voice wouldn't come, only tears. As the officers read her rights, the world around her blurred. The cuffs were cold, almost gentle. She barely heard the words: fraud, evidence, confession. Her mind kept replaying Richard's calm face, the way he'd said, "I trusted you." It wasn't anger she felt anymore. It was grief, the kind that comes when your faith dies before you do. Neighbors watched from their windows as she was led to the patrol car. The flash of cameras, the whisper of gossip, the sound of her own heartbeat, everything felt distant, unreal. She caught her reflection in the car's window, a woman unrecognizable, wearing guilt that wasn't hers. And somewhere far above, in his glass tower, Richard Hale was likely sipping his morning coffee. That night, in a cell that smelled of bleach and despair, Camilla closed her eyes and whispered, He took my life, but he won't take my story. Her voice cracked, but the words stayed. In the corner, a thin notebook waited on the metal table. Tomorrow she would start writing. Tomorrow the truth would begin. By sunrise her face was everywhere. News anchors spoke her name with practiced outrage, their voices echoing through living rooms she'd never step into. Executive assistant accused of stealing millions from Hale Enterprises. Her photo, the one from the company newsletter, smiling, hopeful, stared back from every screen. The world had chosen its villain before the trial even began. In the holding cell, she heard reporters shouting her name outside the police station. "Camilla! Did you steal from your boss? Why'd you do it?" Their questions stung like stones. She wanted to scream the truth, but her voice was drowned out by sirens and flashing lights. Guilt wasn't required. The cameras had already declared her guilty. Richard Hale made his first public statement that afternoon. Standing before the press, he looked mournful, his hand resting dramatically on the podium. "I am deeply saddened," he said, eyes glistening with rehearsed sorrow. "Camilla was like family to us. I trusted her completely." The crowd gasped in sympathy. In that moment he sealed her fate with compassion that felt like poison. Her lawyer visited that evening, holding a thin folder that looked as empty as her hope. "They have bank records showing transfers from your login," he said quietly. "Fake," she whispered. "I can prove it." But he only sighed. "Without resources, you're facing a very long sentence, Camilla." The word sentence felt heavier than the cuffs on her wrists. That night, she watched the news through the bars of her cell. Footage of her arrest played in slow motion, overlaid with words like greed and betrayal. One channel replayed Richard's emotional speech, another debated whether she had accomplices. No one questioned why a billionaire's fraud had been pinned on a widow earning $40,000 a year. No one cared. In the darkness, tears came quietly, not from fear but from disbelief. How easily the world had turned her into a story, how quickly truth had become entertainment. She pressed her hand to her chest, trying to feel something solid inside her. The only thing left was her heartbeat, fragile, defiant, alive. And with that, a small, dangerous thought began to form. She asked for a notebook. The guard laughed. "You planning to write your memoir?" "Already?" She didn't answer. When the notebook arrived, cheap paper, dull pencil, she held it like something sacred. On the first page, her hand trembled as she wrote, "They took everything from me, so I'll give them the truth." Day after day, headlines twisted deeper. Friends stopped answering her messages. Her son's school expelled him to protect the institution's image. She wanted to disappear, but she refused to vanish without being heard. Each night she wrote her thoughts, her memories, her heartbreak, carving her innocence into paper that smelled of damp stone and metal. Weeks passed. The guards stopped mocking her. They'd find her sitting at the same corner, scribbling under the flickering light, whispering as she wrote. Her story was no longer a plea. It was evidence, piece by piece, of the world's hypocrisy. Somewhere out there, she believed, someone would read it. Someone would understand. And maybe, just maybe, someone would believe her. The prison smelled of metal, bleach, and despair, a place where time moved like cold syrup. Days melted into each other, marked only by the sound of keys turning and footsteps echoing down concrete halls. Camilla learned the rhythm of captivity. Meals at dawn, silence after lights out, the hum of loneliness that never stopped. But inside her, something restless refused to die. She still had one thing left, her story. Her diary began as survival, not art. The first lines were raw, shaky, written through tears that smudged the ink. "He said he trusted me. I trusted him more." She didn't write to prove anything. Not yet. She wrote to stay sane, to remember that she existed beyond the uniform, beyond the headlines. Each sentence was a breath against the suffocating air of injustice. At night, when the guard's footsteps faded, she would open the notebook and let the words spill like blood. She described the company offices, the soft glow of glass and ambition, the way the city lights had once made her feel small but safe. She wrote about the moment she realized safety was an illusion built by those who could afford to lie. The paper trembled beneath her hand, but her resolve didn't. Other inmates started noticing. One asked, "Why write if no one's going to read it?" Camilla smiled faintly. "Because truth doesn't die when it's written." It wasn't defiance. It was faith. Faith that somewhere beyond these walls, words still had power. She began hiding pages inside the spine of old library books, tiny pieces of her life scattered through the prison like seeds waiting to bloom. Her cellmate, a quiet woman named Rosa, became her silent witness. Some nights, Rosa would listen as Camilla read aloud from her diary, softly, carefully, as if speaking sacred scripture. "He forged my name," Camilla would say, voice trembling. "He made me trust him so I'd take the fall." Rosa would nod and whisper, "Then write it all down. Make him live with it." The more she wrote, the clearer her memory became. Faces, voices, even the faint smell of Richard's cologne returned to her like ghosts demanding justice. Her pen moved faster each night, scratching against paper in furious rhythm. It was no longer grief she was writing, it was evidence. The diary stopped being a cry for help and became her weapon. Weeks turned into months. Guards began calling her the writer. Some mocked, others respected her silence. But Camilla had found freedom in words, freedom no one could confiscate. Each page was another step out of the prison's grey walls, another nail in the coffin of Richard Hale's lies. She didn't know how or when, but she knew. These pages would see daylight. One evening, while rereading her notes, she realized something chilling. She had recorded enough to destroy him, not just emotionally, but legally. Dates, bank names, digital trails, everything. Her careful memory had done what no investigator could. The fear returned, but so did power. She was no longer the victim. She was the witness. She hid the full diary inside a hollow brick near the sink, a secret tomb for her truth. "If they ever find it," she whispered, "let it speak for me." She didn't know whose hands would open those pages someday, only that when they did, her voice would rise again. That night, under the hum of the prison lights, Camilla smiled for the first time in months. The world had stolen her freedom. But she had taken something back, the power to be heard. The Hale mansion stood high above the city, all glass and silence, a place too clean to feel alive. Ethan Hale, 22, wandered through its endless corridors like a stranger in his own home. His father's voice echoed from the television in the next room. Another interview, another performance of grief. "She betrayed us," Richard said, eyes heavy with fake sorrow. Ethan turned off the TV. He didn't believe him. In the weeks since the scandal, Ethan had become obsessed with finding out who Camilla really was. Her name haunted him. The secretary who had once brought him coffee when he visited the office as a teen. The woman his father had described as family. Why would she risk everything? Why did her mugshot look more heartbroken than guilty? Something in his chest refused to rest. One afternoon, while searching through old company archives his father had ordered destroyed, Ethan found a small box marked confidential evidence. Inside were files, photos, and one worn notebook with smudged handwriting on the cover. C. Torres. He hesitated, thumb brushing the faded paper. The diary smelled faintly of dust and ink, the scent of truth waiting to breathe again. The first page was shaky, desperate. He said he trusted me. I trusted him more. Ethan read the line twice, then again. His throat tightened, unfolded
Page
after page. Her sleepless nights, her loyalty, the moment she realized she'd been framed. The diary wasn't a defense. It was a confession of pain. Her words felt alive, pulsing with everything she'd lost. Hours passed unnoticed. The sun slipped behind the skyline, painting the mansion in gold and shadow. Ethan sat on the floor, surrounded by pages, his hands trembling. For the first time, the empire his father built looked fragile, beautiful on the surface, hollow beneath. "Dad, what did you do?" he whispered, the question hanging in the still air like smoke. He tried to stop reading but couldn't. The diary drew him in, the fear, the dignity, the faith that truth would survive. Camilla wrote about him too, in passing. "The son doesn't know. I hope he never sees the darkness his father hides." That line shattered him. She had protected him even as his father destroyed her. The guilt pressed against his ribs like a blade. By midnight, Ethan sat in the library's glow, the diary open across his knees. Outside, rain began to fall, tapping against the glass like a warning. He saw his father's reflection in every dark window, confident, admired, untouchable. But now Ethan could see what the world couldn't, the cracks, the rot beneath the charm, the mask, and he knew it had to come off. The next morning he watched Richard leave for a board meeting, reporters crowding the gates. Cameras flashed, catching the proud patriarch in perfect light. Ethan stood behind the curtain, holding the diary like a weapon wrapped in paper. The image of Camilla in handcuffs replayed in his mind. The same expression she'd worn when she used to greet him kindly years ago. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, the diary beside his lamp, his laptop open to archived financial statements. The same numbers, the same offshore accounts. Everything matched. Every lie his father had told stood there in ink and pixels. His hands shook as he whispered to himself, she was innocent. And for the first time, the son of a billionaire felt ashamed of his name. At dawn, he packed the diary into a leather bag and left the house quietly. He didn't know where he was going yet, only that he had to find her. Somewhere in a grey cell, a woman was paying for his father's sins. And Ethan Hale, heir to a fortune, built on deceit, had finally chosen to break the silence. The prison gates loomed taller than he expected. Ethan stood there for a long moment, clutching the visitor pass in his sweaty hand. Inside his bag was the diary, its pages creased and sacred. The guard eyed him suspiciously. Sons of billionaires didn't usually visit inmates. "You sure about this?" the man asked. Ethan nodded. "More than ever." Camilla waited behind a pane of glass, her posture calm, but her eyes tired, wary. Time had carved shadows beneath them, but when she saw him, she froze, confusion flickering to disbelief. "Ethan!" Her voice was barely a whisper. He swallowed hard. "I read it. Your diary." The silence that followed was so thick, it seemed to absorb the hum of the lights. For a long time, neither spoke. They just looked at each other. Two people bound by the same lie, from opposite sides of power. Ethan finally said, "I didn't want to believe it. But everything, every number, every signature, it's all true." Camilla blinked, her lips trembling. "You checked?" He nodded. "I checked everything. He did it, not you." The words cracked open something fragile inside her. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. She'd cried enough to fill oceans. "Why are you here?" she asked softly. "Because I can't keep his secrets anymore," Ethan said, his voice shaking. "You wrote the truth, and it's killing me that no one heard you." Camilla leaned closer to the glass, studying him, this boy who carried the blood of her betrayer but spoke with his heart. When she finally spoke, her tone was firm, almost maternal. "Ethan, truth has a price. Are you ready to pay it?" He hesitated, staring at the floor. If I don't, then I'm just like him. The guards signaled for time, but neither moved. For the first time in months, Camilla felt the air shift, the faint scent of possibility cutting through the staleness of despair. After the visit, Ethan sat in his car in the prison parking lot, staring at the rain sliding down the windshield. Her words echoed in his mind. Truth has a price. He knew what it meant. To expose his father would destroy everything, his name, his family, his inheritance. But the thought of staying silent felt worse. Silence was the Hale family curse. That night, he spread the diary pages across his desk again, matching them with documents he'd stolen from his father's files. Transfers, hidden accounts, falsified audits, the puzzle finally complete. Each line of ink was another nail in Richard Hale's empire. Ethan realized, with both awe and dread, that Camilla hadn't just written her story. She had written his father's confession. He recorded everything, the files, the pages, even voice memos connecting the dots. The evidence was undeniable. But more than that, it was human. Every paragraph of Camilla's diary carried pain that statistics couldn't measure. Her words weren't numbers. They were proof of conscience, of courage, of someone who refused to disappear quietly. The next morning, Ethan drafted an email to a law firm known for taking impossible cases. His hands trembled as he attached the files. At the end, he typed, "She's innocent. I have proof, but helping her might destroy me." He hovered over the send button, staring at his reflection in the dark computer screen. The choice was simple and impossible. He pressed send. In that single click, the truth began to move. Slow, dangerous, unstoppable. Richard Hale was pouring whiskey when Ethan walked in. The penthouse windows stretched floor to ceiling, framing the city like a kingdom that belonged to him alone. "You're home early," Richard said, his voice smooth, unbothered. Ethan didn't answer. The diary was in his hand, worn, folded, trembling slightly. "We need to talk," he said. Richard smiled without looking up. "We always do." He turned, glass in hand, ready to play the role of patient father. "Let me guess, you're still upset about that woman." The way he said that woman made Ethan's stomach twist. "Her name is Camilla," he replied sharply. Richard's smile faltered for just a second. "She's a criminal, son. You've seen the evidence." Ethan took a step forward. "I've seen your evidence, and I've seen hers." The room went still. Only the faint hum of the city below broke the silence. Richard set his glass down, expression hardening. "You've been snooping." Ethan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. "I found her diary," he said, "and I checked the numbers myself. The offshore accounts, the signatures, they're yours." His father laughed quietly, a cold, hollow sound. "You don't understand how business works." "No," Ethan said, "I understand how lies work." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "You used her. You made her take the fall so your empire could survive. Lost everything because of you." Richard's jaw clenched. "Watch your tone." Ethan's anger rose, trembling but fierce. "What are you going to do? Disown me? You already disowned your soul." Richard walked to the window, his reflection fractured by the city lights. "Everything I did was to protect this family," he said, his voice low, almost convincing. Ethan shook his head. "No, you did it to protect yourself." The words hung heavy between them. For the first time, Richard didn't have a response. His silence was louder than denial. When Ethan spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "You taught me that truth is weakness, but she taught me that silence is worse." Richard turned sharply. "You think you know better than me? You think this world forgives honesty?" He pointed toward the window. "Those lights out there, they only shine on people who know how to play dirty." Ethan stared at him. realization sinking deep. Then maybe it's time someone turned them off. He reached into his pocket and placed a USB drive on the table, the same one containing the diary scans and evidence. Richard's eyes flickered. "What is that?" Ethan's voice was steady now. "Your empire, Dad. Everything you built, everything you destroyed." For a long moment neither moved. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he reached for the drive. "You wouldn't dare," he whispered. Ethan met his gaze. The same. Eyes, the same face, but no longer the same man. "I already did," he said. Richard's expression cracked. Just for a second, the mask slipped, and fear flashed in his eyes. It was enough. Ethan walked out without another word. The elevator doors closed behind him with a soft chime, sealing the distance between their worlds. In the glass reflection, Richard saw himself, powerful, aging, and utterly alone. Outside, thunder rolled across the skyline like judgment. That night, father and son both realized something irreversible. One had built his empire on lies, the other had finally chosen truth. The rain hadn't stopped since the night Ethan left home. It drummed against the windshield as he parked outside a small, dimly lit office downtown, a far cry from the marble and glass world he grew up in. Inside, a plaque read, "Santiago and Pierce, Criminal Defense." The man behind the desk looked up, gray-haired, tired, eyes sharp. "You must be Hale," he said. "The son, not the father." Ethan nodded, placing the diary gently on the desk. "I need your help," he said. "It's about a woman named Camila Torres." The lawyer flipped through the pages, reading in silence. With every line, his brow furrowed deeper. "If this is real," he murmured, "then your father's empire isn't just corrupt. It's criminal." Ethan exhaled. "It's real, and I can prove it." They worked in secret for weeks. Late nights filled with the hum of printers, screens glowing with spreadsheets and statements. Ethan cross-checked every number Camilla had written. Santiago gathered witness lists, subpoena drafts, and old audit trails. Together, they rebuilt the truth, one piece of stolen evidence at a time. The walls of the office became a war room of justice, but every move came with risk. Richard Hale had eyes everywhere, lawyers, press contacts, loyal executives who owed him their silence. Ethan had to vanish from the spotlight, pretending to reconcile while quietly dismantling his father's fortress. "If he finds out," Santiago warned, "he won't hesitate to bury this, or you." Ethan nodded. "Then we make sure he can't." Some nights Ethan would stare at Camilla's handwriting, feeling her pain bleeding through every curve of ink. He imagined her alone in that cell, waiting for something she didn't know was already happening. "She deserves to know we're fighting for her," he said once. Santiago shook his head. "Not yet. If word gets out, it's over." So Ethan stayed silent, carrying her hope like a secret prayer. Meanwhile, Richard grew suspicious. "You've been quiet," he told Ethan over dinner, his tone too casual. Ethan forced a smile. "Just tired." Richard studied him, eyes narrowing slightly. "Good. Stay focused. The board's restless." Ethan raised his glass, pretending calm. Beneath the table, his phone vibrated. A message from Santiago. The next day, evidence ready, they met with a federal investigator in a small conference room that smelled of coffee and nerves. Ethan handed over the USB, the diary scans, the forged documents. "We can't promise protection," the agent warned. "If this goes public, your name will burn with his." Ethan looked at the photos of Camilla's arrest projected on the wall. "Then let it burn," he said, "but make it true." That night, for the first time in months, he slept. Not peacefully, but honestly. He dreamed of Camilla walking free, of his father standing trial, of the city no longer shining with false light. He woke with tears on his cheeks and the faint taste of fear still on his tongue. The cost of truth was real. But so was the peace it promised. Meanwhile, in her cell, Camilla noticed something strange. Guards whispered, papers shuffled, tension hung in the air like a coming storm. She didn't know why, but her heartbeat felt lighter. Somewhere far beyond those walls, someone had finally listened. The plan was in motion, and this time Richard Hale wouldn't see it coming. The courthouse was already surrounded by cameras before dawn. Reporters shouted questions into the fog, their breath visible in the morning chill. Headlines screamed across every screen. Hale Empire faces corruption charges. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. For months, the world had worshipped Richard Hale. Now it was here to watch him bleed. Camilla stepped out of the transport van in handcuffs, flanked by guards. The chains no longer humiliated her, they simply marked time. She held her head high, her eyes steady. Inside the courtroom, flashes erupted, reporters calling her name as if she were both villain and victim. She spotted Ethan at the far end, seated beside the defense attorney. He nodded once, a silent promise that this was her day. Richard arrived minutes later, surrounded by lawyers in tailored suits. He waved to the cameras with the ease of a man who still believed in his own invincibility. "You okay?" one whispered. "Perfect," Richard replied, smiling like the devil dressed for church. But when he saw his son sitting on the opposite side of the room, his expression faltered, a single crack in the marble. The judge entered. The buzz died. What followed was a theater of truth and denial. Richard's lawyers attacked the diary first, calling it fiction born from desperation. They accused Camilla of manipulating Ethan, of planting evidence. "She's brilliant," one sneered, "too brilliant for her own good." Camilla sat motionless, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her silence louder than their venom. Then came Ethan's turn. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as he rose, walking toward the witness stand. "State your name," the prosecutor said. "Ethan Hale," he replied. Every camera pointed at him, every whisper hushed. "Mr. Hale," the judge asked, "why are you testifying against your father?" Ethan's voice was calm, but his hands trembled. "Because the truth doesn't belong to him anymore." He laid the diary on the table, opening it gently as if it were holy scripture. "These are her words, her handwriting, her life." He paused, voice catching. "My father forged records, created false accounts, and made her the scapegoat. I verified everything. She's innocent." The courtroom erupted, reporters shouting, cameras flashing, murmurs rippling through the crowd like electricity. Richard's mask shattered. "You're lying!" he thundered, rising from his seat. "You're confused! She fooled you!" But the prosecutor was ready. "Then explain these," she said, projecting internal emails, bank trails, and timestamps that matched the diary's entries perfectly. Each click of the slideshow felt like another nail sealing his fate. The mighty Richard Hale stood cornered by his own paper trail. Camilla closed her eyes as the evidence piled up. It was surreal, hearing her own words read aloud, words written in despair, now shining like proof of survival. When asked to speak, she said only this: "I never stole anything. I just believed in the wrong man." Her voice didn't shake. For the first time, the courtroom saw not a criminal, but a woman who had refused to disappear. As the closing arguments ended, thunder rolled outside, echoing against the courthouse windows. The jury's faces were pale, heavy with what they'd witnessed. Richard sat still, no longer a titan, no longer untouchable. Ethan couldn't look at him. The silence before the verdict felt endless, the weight of truth pressing on every chest in the room. When the gavel finally struck, it sounded like justice breaking chains. Months passed before Camilla walked through the prison gates for the last time. The air outside felt unreal, sharp, clean, too wide for lungs that had forgotten freedom. The sky was pale gold, the city alive with noise and movement. She clutched a small bag of belongings and her worn diary, the pages now official evidence and personal scripture. For the first time in years, she wasn't property of anyone's lie. The press waited beyond the fence, but Camilla ignored the cameras. Reporters shouted her name, asking how it felt to be vindicated. She didn't answer. Vindication wasn't what she'd dreamed of in those sleepless nights. It was peace. The kind that didn't come from applause, but from silence, from the simple act of breathing without permission. Freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet. A familiar voice broke through the noise. "Camilla!" She turned. Ethan stood near the curb, raincoat over his shoulders, holding a bouquet of lilies, her favorite, though he couldn't have known. For a moment she just stared at him. The last time they'd met, glass had separated them. Now, nothing did. She walked toward him slowly, each step shedding years of pain. They didn't hug right away. They just stood there, eyes locked, both uncertain of what forgiveness should look like. "You kept your promise," she said softly. Ethan nodded, his voice rough. "You kept yours first." He handed her the flowers, but she took his hand instead. "Thank you," she whispered, "not for saving me, for believing me." His eyes glistened. "You taught me how." They sat together at a nearby cafe, unnoticed by the crowd. Steam rose from their coffee cups, mingling with the grey morning air. "What will you do now?" Ethan asked. Camilla smiled faintly. "Live small, live honest, and right." She looked out the window. "The world loves to forget stories like mine. I won't let it." Her tone was calm, steady, the voice of someone who'd made peace with her scars. Ethan hesitated. "My last name, it feels like a curse now." Camilla shook her head. "No, Ethan. It's a reminder. You didn't inherit your father's sins. You rewrote them." He smiled weakly. "It still hurts." "That's how you know you're healing," she said. "Truth always leaves a mark." Weeks later, a publishing house released her memoir, the diary they tried to silence. It became more than a book. It became a symbol. People saw her story and saw themselves, the silenced, the accused, the forgotten. She didn't crave fame, but she understood its purpose now. Not to glorify pain, but to share it so. No one suffered alone again. Richard Hale, now serving his sentence, refused all interviews. But one day, Camilla received a letter from the prison. No apology, no excuses, just 2 words written in shaking ink. "I remember." She closed the envelope, eyes soft. "Good," she murmured. "Then maybe he's human again." And she let the wind carry that chapter away. On the anniversary of her release, Camilla visited the courthouse steps, the same place where her name had once been spat like venom. She left a single lily there, its petals trembling in the breeze. For every voice they tried to silence, she said quietly, "May we never stop speaking." The city hummed around her, alive and forgiving. As the sun dipped behind the skyline, she turned to the camera, her eyes calm, her voice steady. "If truth costs everything," she said, "then it's still worth paying for." Then she smiled gently and added, "If you believe that too, share this story. Subscribe and let the world know truth still wins."